We're going to have a little conversation, and then I'll ask the audience to ask Richard some questions. I mentioned The Wanderers, which is your first novel, 1974. Is it true that you started that novel in a writing program in school?
Sort of, yeah. I mean, yes, sort of. I started it when I was 20, and when I'm 21, I got a fellowship to go to Stanford, the writing program, because they offered me, a stipend. I was going to Columbia, which gave me a scholarship, but it had no money, so I decided to go to Stanford for the scholarship, plus a big fat $1,500 for the year. Of course, it was 1870, and 1,500 went a lot longer than. But and when I was there, I just got. I was a fish out of water, to use a cliche. I mean, I didn't even know enough that you're supposed to have a car in California, and so I started writing about going back to the Bronx because I realized I was growing up in the Bronx, I realized I was never going to go back there, that the Bronx would only last, my experience of the Bronx would only last as long as my memory, and because of my homesickness, in a sentimental fury, I started writing these stories about housing project kids. By kids, I mean 16, 17, 18-year-old guys, primarily in a housing project in the Bronx. And I put them in gangs because there were gangs. But it was a different time. It was like 1965, 64. I mean, the gangs, it's like a zip gun or a shiv. It wasn't like, AK-47 street sweepers, there was no drugs, there was no criminal enterprise. It was just a bunch of guys hanging around looking for somebody to punch. And so I wrote this collection of short stories, which were authentic in terms of their flavor and savor, but they were not journalism because they were written. If I were to get together 20 years after I left the housing projects with the other guys who are now also in their early 40s, late 30s, and we were going to talk about the old days, but we had a bunch to drink, this is how the stories would come out, which is kind of like a little surreal, a little bullshit, with just enough flavor and kernel of truth. So yeah.
Right. So you wrote those stories as separate stories, but interconnected that trace the gang
what happened
members.
is I just wrote these stories about the same group of guys, and I never even thought I was writing a novel. And what happened was, it was accepted by Houghton Mifflin, and I wanted it to be a collection of short stories, and I was going to call it Tales of Grease or Passion. Way before Grease came out, because Grease is a word. It's a romantic word, for a whole bunch of stuff. And they said nobody's going to buy a collection of short stories by an unknown, so we're going to string these chronologically and call it a novel, just so it has a shot at selling. And it sold a whopping 5,000 copies. Never had to work again a day. And I got a $4,000 advance. I remember that. And I negotiated on the phone during a rain downpour at Newark Airport, because I was teaching English as a second language to airplane personnel, and including guys who had no teeth from chewing sugarcane, to guys that were scientists in Argentina whose company collapsed and was starting all over. I don't know what the hell to do with these guys. I was waiting for somebody to get back to me. I just called up this guy Austin Oldie at Houghton Mifflin because I knew I found out that might have been the company that wanted it. And I didn't even type it. It was like on spiral notebook with the fringes on his face. So I get him on the phone. I walk a mile in the rain because I can't stand this job anymore. I get him on the phone. I said, I wrote a book. It's called Wanderers, Tales of Grease and Passion. You had it for a while. Do you want it or not? And this is the stuff you can do because you're ignorant. It's amazing. So he says, hang on, I'm pumping quarters from Newark to Boston, like this, and all of a sudden he goes, yeah, we'll take it. And I go, how much? He goes, I'll give you 4,000. So you got it. And I went back to the airport hangar and I said, yo quito. Yo quitiero. And I went back to Manhattan and $4,000, but I was getting paid by the hour, so $4,000 was nobody. I didn't know anybody who had $4,000. So he immediately went out and spent all $4,000. I didn't realize it was going to be 9 months between contracts. So by the time I got to $4,000, minus the agent's commission, which is $3,600, I was in debt. I mean, the $3,600.
You're right. No.
10%. I was about $15,000 in debt, and that was the start of my fat and happy financial career.
I don't know. See, I think
what time it is. I'll tell you how to build a clock.
Well, I was going to say that there's something about coming from the Bronx that gives you something that I don't know.
Inferiority complex.
Well, I don't know. My mother's from the Bronx, but she gave me that, but she didn't give me the other stuff. Anyhow, so this just reminds me of something else I read about you, which was that Ladies' Man, which is another book that I like very much. You'll tell me if this is true. Started as an assignment from Playboy that you didn't do, or something.
Well, you got that incredibly wrong.
Oh, good.
It was an assignment from Penthouse.
Oh, okay. Oh, right.
They asked me to go. They had an idea. They wanted me to write a series of articles. This is like the 70s, and they asked me for a series of articles about places that the public can go and engage in sexual acts. So
Here tonight, later.
I'm
sorry. I'm sorry.
I got my Viagra. So I went to a Catskill Singles Weekend, which was otherwise known as we laugh at The Shining, and I went to a backroom bar. On Christopher, down by the Hudson River, a number of backroom bars, in fact. And I went to, I went to like a whorehouse, in somewhere in the west or east 40s in an apartment building. And I started writing these articles. I said, this feels like good. And I also had an idea, like what kind of guy, what kind of character would engage in all three of these things? So I said, well, I just did, And I wanted to write like a novel which is kind of like The Lost Weekend, the Ray Milland thing, except it was sex as opposed to booze. And so I brought back the articles from Penthouse, and I shaped it, sculpted it into a book.
Oh, okay. So I was very far off with the Playboy.
No. You started out like
No. Okay, I'm not going to go through every one of your books. In fact, I'm going to take a
we
little.
Should jump to
we're
the
going
90s.
We're going to jump to we're going to jump to Clockers, because there are a lot of books of yours that I love, and Clockers is one of my favorites. But it might because you made me wait, because there was 7 or 8 years between the breaks.
I wrote 4 novels, each one more self-centered than the last, simply because I really believed, and I was told that write about what you know. And I'm now 32, I'm writing my 4th novel, and I ran out of no. And I just wrote myself into a corner, and it was getting really flat and desperate. So I wrote screenplays for 8 years, Also developed a cocaine habit at the same time, which didn't help things.
It helped the screenplays, maybe.
No, it didn't.
It didn't
help anything.
Yeah.
What happened is, I started writing screenplays in Hollywood, and I had some success. And so I stopped writing novels altogether, because all of a sudden I was getting these offers, do this one with this guy and do this one with that guy. And it was a lot of money, my highest advance was like $30,000 for 4 books.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a lot of money. And the danger in going to Hollywood is that if you're a novelist, sometimes it's hard to go back to novels because you get caught up. It's like the crack pipe of being wanted, and it's also, unlike novels, which are very isolated experiences, you're working with people. And on one hand, hell is other people. On the other hand, sitting at your desk nonstop for 3 years, rearranging 26 letters of the alphabet is another kind of hell. But this was a fresh hell. You know, at least I had a social life. And finally, at one point, I had started for Sea of Love, which is an Al Pacino movie where he was going to play a cop. I did ride-alongs with cops in Manhattan, but mostly in Jersey City, Hudson County Homicide Squad in Jersey City, local precincts. And I got hooked on what you can see when you're with cops. I didn't get hooked on cops, became like a cop groupie or something, but I say this all the time, it's like write about what you know, but what if you learn something? Then it becomes stuff that you know also, and what you know just get larger. And I learned that lesson generally from writing screenplays, because to write Color of Money, it was about pool hustlers. It wasn't a New York City movie, it was a road picture. It was about America, it wasn't about New York. I don't know anything about America, I can't even speak American. And when I said this to Scorsese and Paul Newman, he said, well, maybe you should go out there and know, you're getting paid. So all of a sudden I'm in Alabama at 9-ball tournaments, and Berea, Kentucky, and Virginia, overwhelmingly in the South, and I'm hanging out with these hustlers. And all of a sudden I found myself having the experiences of learning, getting these guys and absorbing them. And if I have enough imagination and empathy, I can create plausible versions of these guys on paper. And that was an eye-opening experience. And so what happened was I learned that, and it was great. And I got very excited about writing all over again. I mean, there's a whole world out there, And, it's not a sin if you write something that's not about vaguely unhappy in Connecticut. I mean, you can do anything, and that becomes... So I used to tell my writing students, and so I got involved with cocaine, or I was not involved with cocaine at this point, but I was very haunted by my experience as a cocaine addict. And then I was teaching pro bono in a rehab center in the Bronx, a Daytop Village, and I was teaching these 15, 16-year-old kids who were crack addicts or crack dealers, and I never did crack, thank God. I just did, cocaine is God's way of telling you you're making too much money, Upper West Side sniffing coke. But these kids were hitting, doing crack, and they came from such horrific backgrounds. Parents dead of AIDS, both intravenous AIDS, suicide, incest. I mean, all the ailments, Dickensian ailments that go along with childhood and poverty. And so I was very moved by these kids. With the cops, I learned so much about places I would never be able to go. And I had my own experience, and I wanted to write Clockers. I wanted to write a story about the interface between the drug economy, the alternatives to the drug economy, interactions between non-white housing projects, adolescent dealers, and basically mostly white middle-class cops that police them. And it became Clockers.
Is it true that you thought about Clockers for a long time before you wrote anything, and you actually pitched the novel?
Here's the thing. I mean, I had spent... So I went back to... There's one housing project that scared the crap out of me, Curry's Woods. It was like the 10th circle of hell. And it scared me so bad, I wanted to go, it's like I want to go back there. I want to examine, I want to face whatever frightened me. And so I became fixated on Curry's Woods. I never go by myself, but I'd go with either, the cops or people I got to know who lived there, who could, vouch for me. and I really, I fell into the project, and I fell into Jersey City, the surrounding neighborhoods, but I didn't have a plot, and this leads to my theory about crime writing. I didn't have a plot. I knew, I spent 2 years in the area, I know I was gonna write about, I was learning, but, you know, without like a targeted centerpiece to the panorama of the place, of, you know, it was a stand-in for every small, big city in America that was experiencing, you know, the devastation of the 80s. And I just went out, and I went out, and I just absorbed, and I absorbed. And I always say, it's kind of like, I had the zip code, but I didn't have the address. I had the address, but I didn't have the house. I mean, it was just, you know, I knew it was there. And just one night, there was a case where I was going with this guy to interview someone who had turned themselves, the parents of someone who had turned themselves in for killing a McDonald's worker in a parking lot. He turned himself in, he had no police record, he was a clean, good, working class kid on paper. And he just came in with a minister and a congressman and surrendered and gave in the gun. And, you know, cops, their attitude is, you know, if a cop makes an arrest, the DA, the first thing they're asked, the DA is going to say, how am I going to lose this? And the DA said, I don't want to hear a trial that this guy who is mysteriously clean had been sexually molesting the shooter's 6-year-old son. I want, you know, so you got to go back and get me more information on this so-called, this confessed shooter. We went to the guy's parents' house in Jersey City on Union Street, off MLK, and the parents were watching Dynasty on TV, and they were kind of like faced away, and the cop was, so, you know, like, you know, I know Tyrone's a good kid. I mean, but basically he wanted to find out if the parents were going to say anything. Well, look, you don't know Tyrone, you know, or something, or at least they wanted a picture of him, because they had to go around to all Tyrone's the guy to confess, all of Tyrone's friends, and show a picture. And they didn't want to show his mugshot, obviously, because everybody would clam up. So they wanted to show a picture of him, you know, smiling in normal life, so the people would relax and talk. And he looks on the tchotchke shelf, the etage-ry, or whatever you call it, and he sees this kid, you know, that head-cocked, you know, graduation angle with the cap and gown, you know, that Frozen thing that you all have at home. And he says, well, listen, can I at least just take this picture, because I need to show it around to his friends and other people, and I want to see him. I want them to see him and recognize him for the good kid I think he is. And they just said, well, that ain't him. He said, what are you talking about? It's dead ringer. He said, that's his brother, they're twins. And it's like, kaboing, the wrong brother. This is a far better thing than I've ever done before. Trail to the cities. You know, the good brother's trying to help his brother, who's, if he gets locked up, he'll go away forever. He goes back, he does, you know, he gets the sheet of this other brother, and it's like a UPI roll. I mean, this kid has been in and out, he's been college so many times, he's got a shirt factory. And it turns out that the kid who confessed actually did do it, and he'd never been caught before. He's a lot smarter than his brother. And whatever his motivations was, he was very smart to surrender in such a way as that, you know, they make a big deal with him. But in my mind, I don't give a shit. I mean, this is great. The wrong brother. So I said, that's it. I'm just going to do a journey into two brothers and a cop investigating both. And that's going to be the spine. And so when I wanted to write the social panorama of Jersey City, what I discovered is that if you center something so big and amorphous with the crime, which allows a spine, an orderly spine, if you follow an investigation, everything is chronological. And everything, you talk to this person, you talk to this person, you talk to the witness over there, you talk to the family over here, you talk to a lawyer that represented, you know, this kid on the other thing, you talk to other cops, you talk to the manager of the housing, and just follow that and you'll get all these disparate voices and it'll give you a portrait. And what I discovered is, I didn't think of it as a crime novel. White's is a crime novel because I was trying to make it a crime novel. But at the end of the day, the only way to write a good crime novel is to write a great crime novel is to write a great novel with a crime in it. You know, there are writers that'll stick to a formula. You know, like the locked room or something like that. That's different. That's more like an exercise. You know, that's kind of like one step up from a crossword puzzle. But but you know, if you want to write really well, I don't remember any of all the great quote unquote novels in the crime ghetto of the bookstore. You know, James Cain, Chandler, Hammett, whoever. I've never read whoever the two guys, McDonald and the other
Ross
guy.
McDonald and
Yeah.
John D. McDonald. Yeah.
But I recognized the greatness in some of the writing, but I never gave a crap about who did it. What I responded to was the singularity of the environment, the voice of the narrator, and the personalities of the players. It's almost like when I found out who did it or whatever. I like books where you know who did it on the first sentence of the first page. Get that out of the way. You know, welcome to my world. Welcome to Chandler's painting of L.A. or James Ellroy or George V. Higgins, you know, magnificent dialogue creation of Boston. And I always like things that are small crimes. Big crimes sort of have a tendency to drown out the humanity of characters. You know, the great train robbery. You know, if somebody, you know, give me a pickpocket any old day. You know, and the cops would always say, when Clockers came out, and later, they would say, Jesus Christ, we showed him, you know, we busted this crew, and we got 8 pounds of uncut heroin. And he writes about this crap? I said, because it's not about, I'm going to leave that to the journalists, you know, and the, you know, you are their nonfiction writers who recreate how this thing went down. And that's their turf. But I think the novelist's turf is the small stuff, always the small stuff, the human beings, not the aha moments.
That's great. Can I, there's so many things you brought up that I'd like to go on, but I didn't just finish The Whites. I told you before. But anyhow, The Whites, which I think is an incredible, and you could call it a cop novel, but Joseph Wambaugh, also terrific crime novelist, said the best crime novels aren't about how cops work cases, they're about how cases work cops. Yeah. And I think this is true of The Whites. And I think The Whites, if you haven't read it, even though Harry Brandt wrote it for Richard, it's a really good book.
Why?
Yeah, no.
All right, for the 10 billionth time, it was a mistake. I shouldn't have never done that. A lot of mystery writers were insulted that I think a lot of mystery writers, from what I hear from friends, you know, were kind of pissed off that because it looked like I was condescending. My feeling was, when I was thinking, I consciously thought I'm going to write a crime novel. And a crime novel, before I really thought it through, the things I'm saying tonight, I felt like there were certain demands, like a constant what happens next, a constant revelation of secrets, a solution when, you know, when life is just so amorphous and crazy, that, you know, I felt like I had to write so fast to be a legitimate orthodox crime novel that, you know, I felt it was such a different type of writing for me that I just wanted to not be me for this book. And it sort of boomeranged.
And then you did become you.
Yeah, and it took my name, that Harry Brandt name off. You know, I got overspooked, you know, when I was writing this. And I wish I hadn't.
Well, I'll just say, I wanted to read, well, you mentioned dialogue, and this is from the New York Review of Books. It says, Price's ear for dialogue, his ability to capture and reproduce the rhythm, tone, and evanescent vocabulary of urban life cannot be overpraised. with all due respect to Elmore Leonard, our first speaker here, Price is our best, one of the best writers of dialogue in the history of American literature. And I thought...
We laugh at Nathaniel.
I was thinking that when I read your books, before I read that quote, I always feel like I'm not so much reading dialogue.
The Mafia called him Natty Seven Gables.
That
That was his name, Natty Seven Gables Hawthorne.
Is that because but you two were always close, right?
Yeah.
You had that fish store.
And it was Billy the Fish Melville.
There you go. Which is where the whites comes from, Billy the Fish Melville and that white whale and okay. Well, it's always good to steal from those guys. I was going to say that your language sort of always to me like it moves the reader through the book in a kind of, I don't know. I was going to say something creepy, not cool. But how do you think about dialogue or just talk about it a little?
To me, it's my favorite. It's like, what type of music do you like? It's like human speech. And I'm a New York writer in the way that you can call Jane Smiley a farm writer, or John Steinbeck a California writer. Where I live and where I was raised defines me and is the bowl of all my appetites as a writer. I take such pleasure in capturing voices, New York voices, but without going all Damon Runyon on it, without caricaturizing them with D's, Dems, Does, or like, yo, brother, that stuff. I just feel like I love how when people speak, how they string words together really offers the landscape of how they think, how they process the world, how they put words together. And it's an addiction of mine. If I could write a book, Henry Green got close to it, but if I could write a book in which I could just purely do, I guess it's called a movie, purely do, painting a picture with voices, I just love it. I just love it. I can do it,
It's obviously...
That's why I love Friends of Eddie Coyle. That was one of the most dead perfect dialogue-laden novels I've ever read.
So can I ask you a couple of, and then we'll have people ask you some questions, but just a couple of quick, little basic questions about, are you a more intuitive writer? What your day is like as a writer, working in an office?
I don't enjoy writing. Since Color Money, I got addicted to what you can call reporting my books, hanging out with the people that I think I would like to know more about, because I think I want to write about people like that. And it's so much more fun than sitting at a desk and actually writing. It's an excuse for, Doc Rowe once said, researching isn't writing, reporting information isn't writing, making lists isn't writing, writing is writing. And so it's part procrastination, part treasure hunt. And that's what I do a lot. I avoid writing as long as I can until I get in a full-blown panic. I take an Adderall and I sit down and I write for 4 hours. And then look at my wife and say, do we have any white wine? Then that's it for the day. I don't enjoy it. It's hard. It's very anxiety provoking. I read this thing that there's this thing called imposter syndrome. They've given a name to it. And I think every writer, not every writer, why am I even saying? I think a lot of writers, even successful writers, when they sit down to do a new book, the resistance they have to getting to work is, well, that one was great, they loved it, but this one is going to show what a fraud I am. Wait till they see this. Then, what happened to Richard Price? And that's why in my panic, probably why I put a pen name on it, I've had such lack of confidence in the final project. But You know, and my wife, who I'm just married 3 years, and she said, she went through the writing advice, she said, and my daughter came over, who's 29, and she said, God, you should have seen your father when he was working on this. He was pulling his hair, he was freaking out. It was a nightmare. And Jen said, oh, he's always like that. I remember when I was 4 years old and he was writing, you know, clockers. He scared the crap out of me. And I wouldn't go near him. He was screaming and pulling his hair. You know, and I keep thinking, oh, I've never been like this. Never been. This one's different. This one's really, this one's I'm finally going to get, I'm playing, I think it's a garden snake, but it's an asp. You know, so yeah, you know, I love being finished though.
Yeah, yeah. Is there some reason, by the way, that when we Google you, they have Jay McInerney's picture on your? Did you know that?
No.
Check it out. It's interesting. I'm gonna ask for some questions here, because if not, I have a million. You know, this is your chance, sir.
Yeah. When did you feel that you had your own sound?
I think I didn't realize I had it, but I think I had it from the beginning in The Wanderers, because I had this kind of like loopy, you know, spontaneous, I had this natural close third person where the narrator almost seemed like a half character, you know, and it just went to that automatically. I don't know why. I know why I did that, because the writers that inspired me to write were kind of like that, like Hubert Selby. Last Exit to Brooklyn, it was kind of realistic, but it didn't have the leadenness of social realism, where it wasn't a book, it was an agenda, where he was part of the whole jazz bebop scene, and he took the heaviness of, you know, urban working class and lower class life, but his prose was infused with this scat lilt, and I just recognized it. I said, you know, and I just started doing it.
Thank you.
Suzanne.
So if I'm remembering correctly, you didn't call the town in Clockers Jersey City.
No,
How come?
because then everybody would think this is a book about Jersey City, when in fact, Jersey City, I called it Dempsey, because I didn't want anybody to think this is a book about East St. Louis, this is a book about Newark, this is a book about Oakland. This is a book about the city closest to your night table. I mean, it was a stand-in for all the cities across America that had this kind of dynamic. I remember every time when somebody was making I based all my scripts in New York, and anytime the location, because of IATSE, you know, union problems or this, that, and the other, or it was cheaper in Chicago, or, you know, The Wire was in Baltimore, I always felt like, oh, I better check out, because it was no different. I mean, Baltimore had alleys, Chicago cops had that checkerboard Ralston Purina thing going on. Same dynamics, same everything. And that's kind of why I didn't say Jersey. It wasn't like Valley of the Dolls for Jersey City.
I believe the Clockers was in Baltimore. Are you telling me it's not in Baltimore?
No.
The Wire didn't.
Why, no.
Yeah, I know.
Sir?
It felt
No.
like Baltimore to me.
No, but it was a stand-in for Jersey
Yeah.
City, and you know.
So, right, like
Yeah,
that.
years ago, I interviewed Elmer Leonard in Miami, and he always credited George V. Higgins, friends of Eddie Coyle, with helping him form the style he came writing later on. I met Higgins at Boston University. Higgins said, when he was working in the district attorney's office, he related his writing style from John O'Hara. Do you see a link in your writing style to particular influences?
Like after me, like who I might have influenced, or who influenced me?
Who influenced you?
Who influenced me was well, you know what, I mean, I fell in love with Elmer Leonard automatically. I just fell in love with the writing.
Westerns or from the Western period? Or
No,
like
from the early
Detroit series?
City Primeval, Detroit at High Noon, City Primeval, 52 Pickup. I mean, that was like electric. And from Higgins, I got all the validation for powerful dialogue. And I mean, the stuff I got from a little bit from everybody. James Cain, you know, that sort of, that nasty, clean terseness of his prose. You know, this is how you evolve. I mean, even when I was like in college in the 60s, you know, and I wanted to be a writer, so, you know, it was the tail end of the Beat period. It was kind of like Richard Brautigan hippie, you know, and so I started writing like Allen Ginsberg, but I never read Walt Whitman. I had no context. But this is how you become to your own style. You start writing like your heroes, then your heroes change because you're growing, and you're experiencing more of life, and all of a sudden you got new heroes, and you kind of write like them. It's just this constant handing yourself off until you finally break away, and you've got all this, you know, admiration for a little bit of this and a little bit of that,
What was
which
your
is
breakaway novel? What would you consider your breakaway novel?
Clappers.
Great.
You mentioned hanging out, being around people you think you might want to write about it as being really important. Curious how much you let them know about what you're
Everything.
intending to do.
You know, because I don't ever want to feel like I'm exploiting someone or I'm tricking someone, and they always offer something in exchange for hanging out with them. I mean, listen, I'm going to make money off this book. What do you need? You know, and I'd offer to cops, I'd offer drug dealers, I'd offer, like, you know, single parent families trying to walk their kids to adulthood. It's like walking a dog through a minefield, you know, in some of these environments. And, you know, I always made it as much quid pro quo. And, I mean, I just wanted them to know that up front. Anytime they needed to hear that, raise your hand again. But nobody, this is a terrible sentence, nobody didn't know what I was up to.
Since you are a social critic, although you're not really out there, can any serious journalism be in your future, like a memoir? Is that too self-serving? What about Child 44? I mean, I was just reading. I never heard of it. I don't think it came to my local theater. I live in the Bronx. I probably live in your neighborhood, not too far. Were you in near Columbus High School? Anywhere around there?
Yeah, it's White Plains Road
Oh, yeah.
and like Allerton Avenue.
Right, yeah. Beth Abraham.
I worked at Beth Abraham when I was
did?
14. But this is, we're playing geography
Yes,
now.
yeah.
I love these conversations, but I mean,
So you're not going to do any journalism about Hollywood? Or
I did a lot of journalism, like pickup journalism. I did a lot of social, but it was cultural profiles. I wouldn't call that journalism. I mean, it wasn't like, you know, information gathering. It was more like, you know, portraits of, you know, finally the truth about Richard Gere. Richard Price tears the lid off Murray the K. I mean, you know, it was what it was, you know.
When you did write-arounds, with the cops, were you ever in, like, seriously dangerous situations?
Twice. And that's because I parted ways from the cops.
Oh.
Now, you know, one time the cops had nothing to do with it. I was just going around with a drug dealer who the cops made go around with me because they had that third strike warrant in their back pocket. Say he was an informant. He had one beeper for his customers, another beeper for Hudson County homicide. And they called him into the office and introduced him to me. And he said, you know, and he didn't have any choice, but we got along real well. I remember the conversation. Well, anyways, the point is, he brought me around at 3 in the morning when the cops are off, you know, or really off, to, he was going to take me to a heroin den in Curry's Woods. And I'd been going around with the cops, the housing cops, and so all these guys had seen me, but they'd always see me in the presence of cops. And they took a look at me, and they could take a look at me, and they said, well, obviously I'm not a cop, so they thought I was some kind of like state's attorney or super cop. And so this guy, who's a drug dealer, brings me around to introduce me to Mr. Big, whose name was Big, And just like 3 in the morning, and it's like, you know, this was like gold chains and guns, and you know, this was, you know, we laugh at Run DMC. And he brought me around. He was going to introduce me to and vouch for me so I could go upstairs, you know, with Big. And the only problem was, you know, he's not. I mean, you know, he's a sort of a free-flowing individual. We get out of the car. He sees the one girl in Jersey City that he hadn't impregnated yet. So he goes, "Come here, I got to talk to you," and disappears around the corner, you know, to be fruitful and multiply. And so I'm sitting alone. So where'd he go? You know, like he kind of forgot about me because he's sort of swimming. And so Big comes over. He's about 400 pounds, and he looks at me, and he goes, he yells, "Oh shit, Frankie, you brought a cop. You know, that guy's a cop." And all these guys came running, and these chains were like, you know, and the hats hunched, you know, and all going like this, like they have a hernia or something. I'm going, "No, I'm not a cop. I'm not a cop." And I had to fast talk my way out of that, and it was not easy. And I remember one guy said, "No, that's that super cop. That's that Dustin Hoffman looking motherfucker with the bad arm." And I go, "I worked on Rain Man." The only thing that got me out of there is I happened to have a copy of Ladies Man on me. And so Big, he said, "Well, what do you mean you're a writer?" You know, and I pulled out a book. You know, I said, "Look, I wrote this. Here's my name." And he took the book. He opens it up and he goes to the last page, the page number, and he goes from 267 pages. "Motherfucker, what do you know for 267 pages?" And I said, "Not as much as I'd like to." I remember he sat down on Frankie's hoopty, you know, sat down. It was so big, he sat down on the front of the car and the back of the car, lifted it up. And he says, "Come on." And he took me, you know, into the building, and I never saw Frankie for the rest of that night. So, like 2 days later, he said, "Yeah, how'd that work out for you, Rich?" Anyways, yeah, then there was a time with the cops, the housing cops, they do, I mean, you have to understand, there were dope lines. And people in the cars, it looked like McDonald's at rush hour. And they were going in front of an address. And, you know, these guys that you know, would just serve up bottles, you know, of crack, heroin, and with impunity, because they knew the cops never came around. And they knew these cops so well. They knew when their vacations were. They knew when they were taking the sergeant's exam. I mean, these cops and these kids, they knew each other so well. And see, this is the thing that I love to capture. Not, you know, 50 pounds of cocaine, but the fact that these kids, when they're getting patted down, they say, you know, when's that sergeant test? Are you studying? You going to class? I hope. You know, yeah, I'm a little nervous there. You know, two-faced, but you know. So I just remember one night, the cops. They know the cops clock out at 9 o'clock. They don't. Whatever happens after 9 o'clock, they're just going to the bar. And one night, they were sitting in their office, and they got a little early jump on going to the bar. You know, start at home, continue at bar. And I remember one cop must have put back a half a bottle of Tullamore Dew. You know, that's like Marie Brizard or Chartreuse. And he just said, "Let's go out. Like, let's go, you know, let's surprise, it's after 9, they'll never know we're coming. What the hell, just for fun." Or he said, you know, just for shits and giggles. So they go out in the car, they show up at the hot spot, they go right past the lines of the cars. Not one of these cars is bailing out. And they all pop out. The drug dealers are standing there flat-footed, it's 10:30, and the drug dealers are looking at these cops, and the look on their face is like consternation, like, not fair. And all of a sudden the drug dealers realize, wow, we're selling drugs, and they're cops. There's no law that says you can't get busted after 9 o'clock in Jersey City. Each one of them went, whoa, and they all took off, and they were gazelles. And these cops averaged about 200 pounds each, and they've been drinking. And there's no such thing. A cop is not going to let anybody run unless he's going to run him down in a car at his leisure. So all these guys got out. All these guys dispersed. And they're chasing these guys. Get back, snot's dragging out, they're wheezing. And these kids are going boing, boing, boing. They're 18, they look like track stars. And all of a sudden I realize I'm sitting in the cop car by myself in the back. And, all the other guys that aren't being chased start coming around the car like this. And they're looking at me like wondering what a lovely ashtray the top half of my skull might make. And all of a sudden I realized, I got to do something. So I said, step back. I was shitting pickles. I said, step back. And armed with my reporter's notebook, I chased the cops that were chasing the gazelles. And there was a cliff. There's kind of like this project went up here, and then there was a steep slope down to the lower apartment buildings. And these kids were going, whoa, like this. And the cops were and there's me going, with my notebook, trying to write. And so I get to the building, and because I see one of the cops chase one of these kids into the building. And I go in there, and I know we chase him up the stairs. All of a sudden, there's just 2 staircases. And the same people start circling around. Ooh. And I'm like, no. And I don't know what to do because I don't know what staircase this guy went up. So this old lady comes down the stairs with a shopping cart, she has like giant magnifying glasses on and knit hat, And I looked at her and said, where'd my partner go? And she had a speech defect. So it took her 20 minutes to say, I don't know. And everybody's getting closer and closer and closer. Thank God the cop comes down the stairs. I didn't catch the kid. And he came down just at the right moment. He's wheezing, he's gasping, he's not even red in the face, he's burgundy. And I'm going, and inside I'm going, yay, yay. I'm going, did you get him, Chris? And I said to him, well, he said something to me like, well, if I wasn't drinking, I would have caught him. And I just said, like, if you weren't drinking, you never would have left the office. But yeah, just to, that's my dining out story.
Listening to these stories, the people who are writing crime might want to switch to romance or something a little less life-threatening.
I'm just saying, for those of you who are new to the writing game, I'm sure there are people here that have their own voice. Just respect the small things. It's all small stuff, and that's where the beauty comes in. And it's the singularity of character, and it's like evoking environment. It's like John Raymond, Good News for the Dead. Derek Raymond. His Manchester, Chandler's L.A., my New York, Higgins, Boston. I mean, place is a very important element. Voice is a very important element. Who actually did it? Secondary.
Right. Thanks. Now, before anybody leaves, Richard is going to be in the back signing books. Please let us get through. People tend to stop the author and try and get the question here. No, not going to let that happen. If you want a question, you have to buy a book, which is a good thing, It's an amazing book. You probably read it in a night. I couldn't stop reading it. But please join us back there. And the Crime Fiction Academy people, you see, the really lucky news is they get to have Richard a little bit longer by themselves. But thank you to Richard. Thank you for coming. Please, for Richard. Thank you.